All right, greetings from the dark continent, Conscious Caracal here to shine some light on the goings on down south. And today we're continuing my culture series, and we're going to be shining a light on a new culture here today that we haven't discussed before, the Chonga culture. And here to help me with that, or to really actually give you guys some insights into regarding cultures here today is Treasure Ntimane, and I hope we can get some insights here that will help you understand South African culture a bit better, or the different cultures that we find around us. So welcome to the show, Treasure.
Thank you, Ernest. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for giving us some of your time. So maybe just to start off, what are you currently doing? Are you working? Are you a student?
Well, I'm currently studying at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm doing my master's in taxation.
Interesting. So yeah, you're currently at that age where you're figuring out the world, getting to know politics a bit better. And I think culture is actually something very important, specifically for people of your age, because it gives you a roadmap to the world around you and how to conduct yourself.
Yeah, that is very true. Culture, I think, is the foundation from which you can develop your identity and how you interact with people in the world. So I think that is very essential to as part of growing up. Yeah. Now I was saying that, as they say that culture can be a wise king or a devouring king. So for me, on the part of my side, it's a wise king. It's giving me guidance.
Excellent. Well, so first things first, your culture's name is the Chonga, but is that also the name of your language?
As a matter of fact, the name of my language is Xitsonga. So Tsonga but Tsonga is basically the people, and then Xitsonga is the language that we speak.
All right. So are there different dialects of Chonga or Xitsonga?
Yeah, the history of our history basically has put us in a position where we have developed different dialogues of Tsonga. People who live, for example, in Limpopo have a different dialect from the people who live in Mpumalanga, Bushbuck Ridge, or people who live in Gauteng. We have very varying dialects, and that is due to our location in South Africa, mainly because of relocating from the southern part of Mozambique, and moving downwards to South Africa. We interacted with various cultures such as Pedi and Zulu and Sotho. Those were some of the cultures that we interacted with. So they influenced some of our language, and so we speak those varying dialects.
Well, that seems to be the case with a lot of cultures in South Africa in regards to that interaction. So is Chonga a unique culture, or are there other cultures in South Africa that speak a similar language or have a similar culture to yours?
Our language is very unique to other cultures. However, we do have similarities in terms of our cultural practice, especially with the Zulu culture, given that way back, Soshangane, the conqueror of the Zulu, came to the Tsonga area or territory to conquer us. And so he integrated some of the Zulu practices into the Tsonga culture. And so as a result of that, some of the practices that Zulus have, we also practice ourselves.
And last time when we were doing our live stream, but then unfortunately had some technical difficulties, you talked about some prominent South African politicians that are Chonga as well. Could you tell us again about that?
Yeah, we have quite a number of politicians here in South Africa who are actually Tsonga. The first one that I can say is our Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni. He's Tsonga, and also Deputy President of the EFF, Floyd Shivambu, is also Tsonga, and the founder of the Action SA, Herman Mashava, is also a Tsonga. So those are some of the prominent South African politicians who fall under the Tsonga tribe.
Yeah, and then as with any culture, I mean, you need an identity, you need to know who you are, and that's going to be formed by your core values and your core ideas that form the foundation of your culture. So in regards to the Chonga, could you enlighten us in regards to what ideas and values form like the foundation of your culture?
Well, the values that we hold as Tsonga people, most of all, is respect. Respect is what is instilled on us when we're growing up. We are taught that we should respect our elders, we should respect our peers. And so as we grow up and we interact with one another, that mutual respect is communicated in every form because that is the core value of our culture. And it's the same when you meet someone who's a stranger and who is Tsonga. When we interact, there's that mutual connection of respect because of the background that we have. Of our thing is that our culture is heavily reliant on hard work and personal responsibility. You know, growing up, we're told, take out your hands out of your pocket. You don't have $1 million. You know, we need to work hard, take responsibility for your life. And so those are some of the things that our culture instills on us. I remember my grandmother and also my father, they always say to me, which means that you do good things for yourself. And so those are some of the values that were instilled on us, that you don't have to wait for anyone to do anything for you. You have to go out there and get your hands dirty and get it done. Another thing is that our culture is peace loving. And so when Soshangana first came to the northern part of Africa to encounter the Tsonga tribe, what he found was that it was a peaceful community of people that was prosperous. And so that is a defining character, if I can put it that way, of our culture, is that we are very peace loving. And so in whether it's in our music or it's in our dance, we get to express that peace.
Right. And then also, just as language is very important, symbols, I think, are also very important, and colors. And specifically talking about colors, when I was looking for images to make the thumbnail of this episode, I saw there was a lot of bright colors, specifically yellows, connected to your culture. Can you maybe elaborate a bit more on those colors?
Yeah, well, our colors are definitely one of the things that make us stand out from other cultures. I'm sure when you encounter those bright colors, you definitely know that these are Tsonga people. And so those colors have a representation. And so the yellow color, as you mentioned, is a representation of wealth or abundance. So there's a tribe that is called Tsonga. These people were people who lived in the coastal line of Zimbabwe, and so they used to farm a lot. They were involved in agriculture, and so they defined rain, or they saw rain as something that brings blessings. You know, so yellow, those are the colors that they wore. So that color was a representation of the wealth and abundance that came with the rain as they did their agriculture. And so another color that we have is the pink color. So the pink color, what it represents is status, or it represents promise. And so this one leans more to the female. So when a female is engaged or is betrothed to marry another man, they wear the pink color, I'm sorry, to represent that they have a promise. There's someone who's going to marry them. Or if they're getting married, their traditional attire for that specific day will be pink because it represents that it's a person of high status, and it goes along also with their royal families. They usually wear pink to represent their status. We also have green in our culture, and so the green is a representation of contentment. So it shows that you're happy with what you have, and it's usually worn by the elderly people to show that they're content with the husband that they have, the kids that they have, and their grandchildren, and their family as a whole. So those are the representations of our colors.
Hmm. And then also, I mean, color is a symbol. And I mean, you think about any culture in South Africa, a lot of symbols come to the fore. With my own culture, if you think of the Afrikaners, you think of ox wagons. When you think of the Zulu, you think of that famous shield symbol. When you think of the Sotho, you think of their hats. Are there any of those types of symbols, apart from the colors, that go with the Chonga culture?
Well, for us, it would be the traditional wear, which obviously leans more heavily to the females. They have this coat, it's called chibelana. They usually use it to dance with it. So that is our main symbol. I think if you see the chibelana, you automatically know that this is associated with Tsonga people, and it represents it's how they represent themselves or express themselves in their dance. So they use that Chibelana to dance with it.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about these things is, and we can get into that later into the episode, is that when you go into rural areas, you still see a lot of this symbolism, you see a lot of those colors that are associated with different cultures. But then when you get into urban spaces, in my experience, that seems to fade. Now, when it comes to the Chonga culture, is it still, the majority of the culture still very rural, or has a lot of urbanization taken place?
But I would say the majority of Tsonga people that you'll find, for example, in Johannesburg or in Pretoria or in Nelspruit, Mpumalanga, or in Polokwane, in Limpopo, the majority of people that you'll find is people who have become urbanized, if I can use that word. And they don't usually practice as much of the tradition as is because of obviously Christian influence and Christian values that have been integrated into our society. So majority of Tsonga people, as one stat shows, is that most of Tsonga people are Christians, are influenced by Christian values rather than the traditional part of the Tsonga culture. And so, if you want to experience that that authentic Tsonga, if I can use that word, is you have to go to the rural areas to get that rich cultural experience of the Tsonga culture.
And yeah, you mentioned Christianity there, and all my previous guests that I've talked to also had a very strong Christian influence there, specifically Koketso that I talked about in Trana culture. Could you, and we talked about this before, unfortunately our previous episode couldn't be finished. In terms of the Christian influence, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on that in Chonga culture, specifically the role of Christianity?
I would say when the Portuguese, or rather the Swiss mission churches started to, the missionaries started to evangelize in South Africa, most of the cultures that they encountered were the Pedi, the Tsonga, the Zulu, and everyone else. And so our values as Tsonga people, or especially those who live in urban areas, are more closely associated with Christian values. Whereas when you go to the rural areas, you'll find ancestral worship. And so most of the things that I knew growing up was that we worship God, we're Christians, we follow the Christian values other than worshiping our ancestors. And so that's the hallmark, I guess, of many Tsonga people that I have interacted with, is that most of them are Christians, whereas when you go into the rural areas, you find ancestral worship. And so they believe heavily in worshiping ancestors and magic and all of those things. And so I think that is the divide between urbanization and the rural areas.
Now, I think you mentioned this also when we talked previously in regards to you growing up Chonga or within the Chonga culture. Maybe just talk a little bit about the influence that culture had on you growing up, that cultural presence as you grew up. What was that like?
Well, growing up in the Tsonga household, I would say was quite interesting for me because I got to experience the dual. I got to have a dual experience of the rural side and the urban side of the Tsonga culture because, well, my grandmother and grandfather lived in the rural areas, and so when I visited them, I find that the stories that they would tell was much more based off of ancestral things, ancestral worship, and all of those things. So, but what was nice about it is that we got to learn more of our culture in the rural area. So, for example, we used to have story time, and so in Tsonga we call it mcheketo. So it's basically it's story time. You sit down with elderly people, and they tell you parables using the Tsonga language so that they can teach you the values of life. And so that was very interesting, and it helped me to understand a lot of things from an early age. And when growing up at home, it was also quite interesting because my parents were Christians, but some of the cultural practice we still had them. For example, the music. My family is much more into creative arts, so music, playing the guitar, is something that is widely encouraged in my family, and so that encouraged me to get into music as well as dancing as well. Every Christmas we get together as a family and we just play that song of music and we just enjoy ourselves and dance. And so growing up was having those values and those ideas instilled on us that familyhood is very important, and that is also central to our culture.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Is that I mean, if you look at the history of African cultures, that family is what keeps you alive. That's what pretty much is the line between you surviving or not. So it's not a surprise to hear from all
Yeah.
my guests that I've spoken so far the importance of family and the role that family plays. But yeah, that's very interesting to hear. Now, in regards to Chonga music, is there actually a Chonga music scene in South Africa of like music artists and the like?
As a matter of fact, there's quite a lot of Tsonga musicians in South Africa. Most of them have also had international influence. There's the first person to perform in the USA, perform at least the Tsonga cultural music was Shaw Nozinja, who performed for the first time. And so people were impressed by his music. And so his influence grew and it went down to Thomas Chauke, is one of the prominent Tsonga artists. Right now, in modern day, I guess the only one that I can say is Shoma Josie. She has a song called John Cena, and she's been widely praised internationally. And so those are some of the artists that we have.
No, that's interesting because I've told one of my good mates, Odin Moja, Wotan on Twitter, also, you talk about the Tswana music scene in South Africa as well. And it's very interesting to see that and I mean, there's the Afrikaans music scene as well. And it's interesting to see every culture have their musical identity manifest through music. And as you said earlier, music plays a very large role in your culture, and your culture is not alone. I think all South African cultures have a very strong connection to music, very strong connection to dance. And I don't know, maybe it's something about the area, maybe it's something about the southern tip of Africa, but that seems to be a shared value amongst the majority, if not all, South African cultures.
Yeah, I think we use dance and music to celebrate, to be grateful for the things that we have, whether it's our peace, whether it's our prosperity, our wealth, our family. We use our music and our dance to express that kind of joy. And so it's quite fascinating and very inspiring to see, the likes of Shoma Josie not deviating from the roots of their culture, but basing their music off of the Tsonga culture. It's very interesting, and for it to have such a big audience and a big listening, it's just amazing and phenomenal.
I know I asked a similar question earlier, but are there other African languages in South Africa that you can understand being a Chonga, or is there not enough similarity?
I don't think there's enough similarity, but in my case, I can say because of the environment that I grew up in, where Swati people and Zulu people were kind of in the same area. It helped me to understand those kind of languages. But if someone is, let's say, purely Tsonga and they come into South Africa, I think they will have difficulty understanding the likes of Zulu or Pedi. They might have those similar terms or words that are in Zulu, but the translation will be very different because, yeah, we have a dialect that is similar, but the meaning of the words is very different.
Hmm. And you say there's a large population of Chonga in Mozambique as well, but you think the majority live here in South Africa, correct?
Yeah, I think the majority is here in South Africa, although we do have people in Mozambique, because I mean, in South Africa, we have Tsonga people in Mpumalanga, we have Tsonga people in Limpopo, we have Tsonga people in Gauteng. So we are spread across those three provinces. That's the majority of provinces that you will find Tsonga people. So I would assume that the majority of us are here in South Africa.
Mm.
And also you can find Tsonga people in Swaziland, in the northern part of Swaziland as well.
And then talking about that, actually, there's a historical element to it as well. I mean, what type of culture are the Chonga still, but historically, what were they? Were they hunters? Were they a warrior tribe like the Zulus? What was the type of tribe that the Chonga were generally?
No, we were we were a hunter and gatherer culture. So we migrated, we moved around a lot. We started in Central Africa and moved down north into Mozambique area. And then when the Zulu war started, the Mfecane, as they call it, we moved further down into Limpopo and Mpumalanga. And so we are heavily we're heavily focused on agriculture, which includes growing crops and also livestock. So that was our main focus. We were not really a fighting tribe, although when Soshangana came to conquer the Tsonga people, we had to mobilize, so that we can defend ourselves. And so that's when he got integrated and the Zulu culture got integrated into the Tsonga tribe.
So you mentioned the Mfekane there. So the Chonga were at war with the Zulus, or the Zulus tried to conquer the Chonga at one point.
Yeah, at some point they did try to conquer the Tsonga people, and it was not even once, it was twice. First, it was Soshangana who came to conquer us. He was defeated, and then he just ruled a small minority of the Tsonga tribe. And so history books say that he died a proud Tsonga, and the reason for that is that the next war that came as a result of Shaka Zulu, he was actually at the forefront of the war. He was one of the generals who fought with us. Him being originally Zulu had now been integrated as a Tsonga person, and so he fought to defend the Tsonga people against Shaka Zulu.
So wait, just to get that correctly, so who fought on the Chonga side against Shaka Zulu?
Soshangane.
Ah, right. That's very interesting that you mentioned that. It shows a nuance to South African history that a lot of South Africans unfortunately don't know. The political narrative is that there was no conflict in South Africa. Everyone was living in peace. But of course, whenever you look at any part of the world where humans are, there's always going to be conflict. Wherever there are tribes and wherever there are factions and nations, there's always going to be vying for power, for resources. And it's interesting to see that, because that's the thing, is that this influences dispersion of populations as well. As you mentioned earlier, the Mfekane and that war also had a big influence on where the Chonga are located today.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think part of the reason for that false narrative, if I can put it like that, is that the history that is told from the point of view of the Portuguese coming here to start war, whereas there is another element of that history which includes the Khoisan and the San people. And so when you take the historical part from that narrative or from that point of view, you start to see that there was a lot of war and tribal war between Zulu, Tsonga, Pedi, Ndwa, Ndebele, and all these the different tribes in South Africa. And so when you look at it from that perspective, you start to realize that it's not a black and white issue, but it's that everywhere where people are divided into tribal groups, there's tribalism and there's always war that will break out. And so, yeah, that is very true.
What you're describing there is just the human condition.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I think that's how it's always been, and that's how it's going to be a long time into the future. Even though our conflict is going to change form, you're not going to see as much brutal conquest today as you would in the past. War or conflict is going to take different forms, but that conflict and friction is always going to be there. I think that's part of the human condition, and the better we understand it, and the better we make peace with it, I think the better we can plan for the future and deal with it in regards to minimalizing any type of conflict where cultures are wiped out. Because I think that would be one of the great tragedies, is if a culture were to be destroyed, because then you lose a perspective that you're never going to get back. You're going to lose a set of practices and beliefs and a worldview that's never going to come back. So in regards to your culture today in the 21st century, what do you think are some of the key challenges or obstacles that stand in your way when it comes to young Chonga men and women in regards to the challenges that they face today?
But I think the fact that we have moved into an industrial age where people are working a 9 to 5 job, it's hard to actually get those oral traditions or those oral teachings that were passed down, for example, to my parents or my grandfather's parents. We lack those teachings, and the fact that they are not codified makes it challenging to actually learn about the Tsonga tradition, to learn about our practices, our values, to understand our history. It's very difficult to find those stories that are purely Tsonga stories those parables that are purely Tsonga. So those are some of the challenges I think that we're facing. And I think the one thing that we could do is to actually codify some of the Tsonga laws that were implemented, before the South African Constitution, to understand the legal part of it, to understand the socio-economic part of it, to understand how Tsonga people actually conducted themselves. So we need that codification of our history, basically.
And that's the thing, is that a lot of African cultures, traditions are passed down orally. You have an oral tradition. And unfortunately, a lot of that gets lost in times of war, or in times of chaos, or in times where things are going rough, or things are not going as well. People don't always have the time or resources to really pass down all that knowledge. And now today, with a lot of the chaos that comes with, for example, urbanization or the pressures of modern life, I do think there's a lot of that is lost. What are your thoughts on that preservation of knowledge, specifically coming from the perspective of a culture that has a very strong oral tradition of passing down knowledge?
I think there's already a move to preserve our cultural, our cultural monuments. Our cultural monuments and our tradition. There's a move. For example, I know from where I come from in Hazelview, there's a place where you can go where you find only Tsonga traditions that will be explained to you, whether it's the pottery, the houses, the different colors will be explained to you. And so those are some of the things that are being done recently, but I think there's still more that needs to be done in terms of writing our history in books, archiving it on the internet or on the government website, so that it's much easier for young people as they grow up to know their cultural background, whether you're Tsonga or Zulu. We need that kind of initiative.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying that those initiatives are happening today, maybe not happening overnight, but there are people taking initiative to preserve your culture.
Definitely. When you go to Mpumalanga, you'll definitely find historical areas where you can actually visit, and you'll get the Tsonga experience.
Well, that's very important. I mean, me as an Afrikaner, I understand that very well. We are also very concerned with the preserving of our language and our culture. And also the other thing is you need anyone that has a love for culture in general and a love for their own culture also would want to see the cultures around them preserved, because that adds to as MP van Wyk Lou, my favorite Afrikaans philosopher, said, all the cultures are the different instruments in the orchestra of God. And if one of those cultures were to die out, that would be one instrument less in that orchestra, and it will never play again.
Yeah, that is very true. And so our culture also makes us understand our deep history and our connectedness as a people. The fact that I can relate to some of the Zulu stories, I can relate to some of the Pedi stories is an indication that there is a rich history or a deep history that connects our cultures. And so to preserve that should be of paramount importance.
Yeah, because like I said, when that knowledge is lost, it's lost. You're not going to be able to go dig it up somewhere again. It's not like it's just lost out there and you can go find it again. When that knowledge is gone, it's gone. So this is very serious.
It's gone, yeah.
The preservation of culture, that is. It's very serious.
That is very true.
So in regards to your, when it comes to your life and the cultural influences in it, would you say that growing up with the Chonga culture present enriched your life?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. Everywhere that I go, I try my best to make a change, to make my culture seen, whether it's at church, whether it's with my friends, we're having a gathering, it's more of like I try as much as possible through dancing or through playing the guitar. I try as much as possible to showcase my culture. And so it's always amazing to see the amazement in people's faces and their fascination over me dancing to my cultural music or expressing myself through my cultural dance. It's always like you are so high energy, and it's like, yeah, our dance is exactly like that. And so it's always nice to have those kind of experiences, and also the fact that I have respect for every person whether you're younger than me, older than me, you're the same race as me or different races. Like, I have respect for each and every person. And so that goes back to the values that I spoke about earlier that we have as a culture. So that has enriched my life in that way.
Mm. So now that you mentioned that in regards to your respect for young and old, is there a sense of hierarchy as well in the Chonga culture in regards to elders are respected, these members of the culture deserve respect? How does that work? Well, how do you as a culture approach that?
There is indeed a sense of a hierarchy in our culture. We have our chief, and then you have his family, the royal family, and then you have the subordinates. And so that has basically gone even to the level of family members. The father is the head of the family. That is still that, and the mother, is second to the father. So there's that hierarchy. You don't talk back to the father. That's we don't do that. It's more of like, it's something that is bizarre to us. So that kind of respect is afforded to our elders. So there is indeed that hierarchy.
You mentioned the chief there. Is there currently a Chonga king?
No, unfortunately, we don't have a Tsonga king.
Mm. But
The reason, the reason,
continue.
the reason being is that it is still disputed as to whether the Tsonga culture has ever been integrated into one royal family, because what usually happens is that different families just break out of a particular chiefdom if they see that there's unfairness or gross corruption that happens. And so you find that there are a lot of tribes in the Tsonga community. You have the Nkuna, you have the Ndlovu, you have the Hlongwan, there are a lot of them. So that comes as a result of families breaking out of the chiefdom that has already been established to form their own independent structure.
Mm. But I assume you have traditional leaders.
Yeah, we definitely do have traditional leaders. Well, for where I come from, the tribe that the chief, let's say Induna, as the Zulu would put it, is the Nkuna family. So that's where our municipal authority comes through. It's the Nkuna family. So that's where we get our title deed. When we talk about title deeds, we go to the Nkuna family.
Mm. But maybe I would like to have a little bit more information there, because that's very interesting, because that's where a lot of the cultural divergence between, for example, Afrikaner culture and many other Black African cultures diverges, is that role of the traditional leader. Could you give me some more information in regards to what the role of that traditional leader is?
Well, the traditional leader, his central role was to adjudicate disputes. That's basically the role of that leader, is to ensure that whenever there's a dispute among the members of the particular tribe, he had to adjudicate on that. And usually it would be a male who would adjudicate on the matter. And so that was the role. And also to prepare if there is any intruders who are trying to intrude the tribe, he would prepare the men to fight. And so that was also one of the things that a leader would do as well. Another thing that they were responsible for was the initiation school, because we also have that, given that our influence comes from the Zulu people mostly, we also have initiation schools. And so that will be conducted by him.
What is the role of the initiation school? What is it? What is the role of it in your culture?
Well, it's basically a transition from boy to man.
No, because I know the Zulu have that tradition. The Xhosa also have it. So it's interesting to hear that the Chonga have it as well.
Yeah, we also have it. It's where we transition from boy to man. And so once you are initiated, you have a higher status from, let's say, someone who's much younger than you. And it doesn't only apply to the males, but it also applies to the females. And so what happens there is that they teach you, your tradition, as well as what it means to be a man. And so those were the initiation schools.
So I assume you have already gone through your initiation ritual.
Well, not really, because my family is not traditional. So no, I didn't go there. Yeah.
Do you think it's a tradition that is under threat, or less and less people are doing it, or is it still going strong in regards to the more rural areas?
I think in the rural areas it's going strong. The reason why among urban areas it's not practiced as widely, it's because of the ancestral part that is involved with it. And so given that many urban areas, people have Christian values or Christian leanings, they don't engage in that sort of initiation because of the ancestral part of it.
So something else that I wanted to get to is cultural heroes. Now, every culture has their big figures. I mean, the Zulu have Shaka Zulu, the Afrikaners have De La Rey and Piet Retief. In terms of the Chonga culture, do you have any leaders that come to mind that you could share with us?
Yeah, definitely. The first one that I can share is Sonduza II Minga. So Minga, what he did was he united, he was the first chief to unite all the different tribes in the Tsonga community, since they were very divided and there was a lot of infighting. So he was the first chief to actually unite us. The reason for him to unite the Tsonga tribe was because during the 1950s, 1960s, the apartheid regime were creating Bantustans, right? So they wanted to integrate the Tsonga people into the Pedi or the Zulu Bantustans. And so Sonduza saw that this would actually make us lose our cultural identity, because we are not Zulu and we are not Pedi. And so by uniting that, it resulted in the creation of the Gazankulu Bantustan, which was predominantly Tsonga people in that Bantustan.
That's something that comes to the fore quite a lot, that threat to culture of integrating into a culture that's not yours, or integrating into the majority. So, for example, there was a lot of efforts in the past to anglicize the Afrikaner culture as well, to turn us English. But also our leaders in the past understood that if that happens, we're going to lose our culture. So, and I think today still, especially with urbanization, I mean, as people move into urban centers, there's a lot of that going on, of people losing their culture because they are moving into a space where they are a cultural minority, and then they are not surrounded by people that will help them preserve their culture. So I think that's a theme that's come to the fore of all my other chats with Nzuzo, with Koketso, with Ruan, who I talked about Afrikaner culture, as well as that threat of urbanization. Now, a lot of positives come from it in regards to upward mobility. You can get better jobs in urban areas. I understand why people move to urban areas, but there is that cultural threat, and you mentioned it earlier. So do you agree with my ideas, or what are your thoughts in regards to urbanization and culture and the dynamic between the two?
I definitely agree, given that, our culture, let's say for us Tsonga, the fact that those different tribes were willing to come together and become one tribe to show that they can actually have their own Bantustan or sovereign governing, as a matter of fact, shows the importance of preserving a person's culture. And so when you look at urbanization, and what it's doing is that it's creating that divide. And so by doing so, it's a lot of people lose meaning or even respect for their own culture and the understanding that comes with it. And so I think that is a great threat to it. But yeah, those are some of the heroes that we have. I also wanted to mention former president of Mozambique, Samara Machel. He was also a Tsonga president. And so I'm guessing you know a lot about him. You must know
that's
about
interesting.
Samara Machel. Yeah, so he was Tsonga as well. I think if you have a lot of Tsonga viewers, they would call me out for not mentioning Hudson Ntsangwesi, because he's also one of the Tsonga heroes. So Ntsangwesi was actually the first person to lead the Gazankulu Bantustan, and so he did a lot for self-governing in terms of the Tsonga Bantustan.
And when around was this? In what decade?
It was during the 1960s, 1970s.
Now that we've talked about the heroes, there's something else that's also important to culture, and that's their myths and their legends and their stories. Um, are there any myths or legends or those types of stories or fables or parables that really stand out in your culture that you can recall now when you think about it?
I think the stories that I can mention are the stories that we learned about in high school, since I did Tsonga as a home language.
Hmm.
So there are certain stories that we were taught in high school, and so some of them is the first one that I can think off the top of my head is called Matlare Hansi. The book is still available; you can get it online. So basically, what those stories were talking about was the point that I started with when I talked about the core values of the Tsonga people. So the author of the book wrote the book in response to the fact that people were not valuing education as they should. And so he was addressing how could the value of education be brought back into the lives of students as well as teachers. And so he emphasized that respect is the foundational part of recreating that relationship. And so Matlare Hans is one of the famous books of people who have, who are Tsonga. And so another one is called Bukosi. So in this book, they talk about polygamy and the troubles that come with polygamy. So those are some of the interesting books that we have.
Oh, well, that's those are the types of things that you need to preserve. I mean, if those stories are gone, you're not going to get them back. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about oral traditions in cultures is that you need those types of stories to pass down knowledge, to pass down values. I mean, you can see this in all the classic stories in every culture has. Um, Now, is there an effort to preserve these stories? Are they still being printed? Are they being written down? Are they being documented in any way?
I would suppose that they are, given that they were part of our home language curriculum. I'm not sure now. It's been long since I've been in high school, since I left high school. So I wouldn't know what's part of their curriculum right now. But I would suppose that they're still being printed out, and luckily you can find the books online. So that is something else.
There's one more thing in regards to that topic, and when you're talking about, well, we covered a lot of aspects of your culture. I find it very interesting. And maybe just to finish off as your final thought, what are your thoughts on the value of culture or the why it needs to be preserved? If you could share that maybe as a final thought for our chat.
I think our culture gives us, like I said, a foundation for our identity. You know, without culture, we become unstable, and so we will become susceptible to many different influences that might not agree with our cultural background. And so to understand your culture would mean to actually get to know who you are. It's more of like the first step of understanding who you are as an individual. And so the preservation of cultures would actually help a lot in terms of informing people who don't know what or who their identity is, or trying to discover themselves, especially among young people. And so I think the preservation of our culture is something that could help in that aspect of our lives.
Treasure, I think that's a perfect way to end our conversation. Those are very wise words. I completely agree. In regards to where people can find you, where your thoughts are being shared, I know you're on Twitter, and there is a link to your Twitter in the description. But is there anything else? I heard a rumor about a website that might be published soon. If you could just maybe give people an idea about that.
Well, I'll be starting a website, hopefully mid-December, it will be up and running. In the website, I'll be sharing my thoughts on different things that are happening in South Africa. I'll be giving the legal perspective of it, as well as my own philosophical understanding to those particular topics. And so the website's name will be treasurentimane.co.za. That's where I will be putting off all of my articles.
All right, excellent. And I will definitely be sharing that and checking it out myself. Treasure, thank you very much for your time. And I will definitely have you on in the future again, maybe to talk about some other topics. But oh, excuse me, this was definitely, I enjoyed it a lot, and thank you again for your time, and thank you again for everyone that tuned in, everyone that watched. Sorry that this is not live this time. We just did a pre-recording because last night when we wanted to do it live, Telcom wasn't playing along. So I think rather today, to play it safe, we did a pre-recording, but now you will be able to watch it. So thank you very much for watching. You can leave a like if you like these types of conversations. You can subscribe. I will be talking to other people from other cultures in the future as well to continue this series. And as I said, if you liked what Treasure had here to say today, there's a link to his Twitter in the description. So go check it out and go give him a follow. I hope everyone here enjoys the rest of their evening or their afternoon or their morning whenever you're listening to this. And I'll check you again on the next one. Take care and God bless.